So, one of the things that I hear a lot of the times when I've coached all these busy executives and entrepreneurs over the age of 40 is my grandfather used to do X and he was healthy. But when I do that, I'm not as healthy. Right? We've heard multiple stories about how our grandparents would eat bottles of ghee in terms of, like just pouring it on their chapatis, pouring it into their sambar, and essentially eat a ton of chapatis, eat a lot of sweets. In the place that I come from, they eat something called rabdi, which is an Indian sweet. Our grandparents did all of this, but yet we see them walking around so healthy, right? Or at least for as long as they lasted, they kept walking around so healthy. But then, even when a lot of my executive and entrepreneur clients are eating something super healthy, right? Like, for example, vegetables, they still seem to have high blood sugar levels. And this is a common query I get, which is that if my granddad ate something which was healthy and natural, and I'm eating the same thing, why is it that his health was so much better and why is it that my health is so much worse? And that's exactly what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be covering three important factors. One is the change in nutrition, even in something as basic as vegetables and fruits. Right? Has it changed? And if so, from when? And what has it changed into? And number two point that we're going to be covering is the change in lifestyle from our grandfathers to us now, so that we understand where the gap lies, how they were able to get away with eating certain things that we cannot imagine getting away from. And number three that we're going to cover is what are the implications of the future? What does the future look like in terms of food? Right? Let's get right into it. So, the first point that we're going to be covering is what has changed. Right now, I don't know if many of you like fruits, but personally, I love fruits. Right? And one of the fruits that I love is watermelon. It's something, when I think about it, it just makes me so thirsty and hungry. Right? Watermelon is something that is very close to my heart, especially if it's something that you put in the fridge and it's cold watermelon. Madness. I absolutely love that. And when I think of watermelon, I think of something that has this bright red inside when we cut it open, right? Very little of that green stuff that tastes like cucumber, also called the rind of the watermelon on the outside. Almost no seeds, just so that I can dig it in with my hands and eat it like an animal. Of course, most of you probably just eat it cut like normal human beings. Personally, I like to go a little bit ballistic, point aside. But that's what I think of when I think of watermelon. And I was really shocked. In fact, I was blown out of my mind when I saw what real watermelon looked like. And this is one of those things where like your whole life you've believed that watermelon is this fruit with this nice red inside. And then you see a painting of watermelon from just 300 years ago, right? Not even some long ago time. And you see that a lot of the stuff on the inside of the watermelon was actually the green part that tastes like cucumber, also called the rind, and not the red part. And even these tiny pockets of the red part that existed in the watermelon had a lot of seeds. Now, when I looked at it, I was really shocked. Right, and this is what made me research a little bit deeper into what has actually happened to fruits and vegetables. And when I looked deeper, I saw that the bananas that we consider bananas are bananas like roughly around this big. Of course, it depends on what breed. If you're speaking about something we call in Kannada Yelaki Balehanu, that is a smaller one. But usually the one that we're speaking about is like pretty big, right? And when I look back at what actual bananas look like, I was shocked because a real banana has barely any of the white fleshy part that we actually eat. A real banana actually has massive black seeds all over and barely any of the white fleshy part that we all consider a banana. So I dug deeper, right? And it's the same thing, right, with corn. where I saw corn before, and it's like these tiny pieces of corn which are like just stacked on top of each other. They almost all also look like this thing that I'm wearing, right? It's just like these small things which are like a thin line of corn. And now when I think about corn and I look at corn, even the things that we make popcorn from, it's like this massive thing with like corn everywhere, which you can just like cut off and remove. And essentially, when you look at all of these fruits and these vegetables and how they've changed over time, it's important to understand what has really happened and what does that do to our health, right? Because in your eyes and my eyes, a banana is a banana, corn is corn, and watermelon is watermelon. But if our ancestors were eating something different or something that was not genetically modified and called that watermelon and that banana, then is what we're eating exactly the same? Of course not. So is it safe to say that what we're going to eat is going to produce slightly different results in the body? Absolutely. And that is what we're going to talk about here today. Right? Because when I did more and more research, what I found out was that from this study published in 2004, according to the USDA, and let me pull it up for myself here just to be accurate, right, is that it essentially showed that even through all of the genetic modification, what it has come down to was that compared to the USDA nutrient data, right, which is like the Dietary Association of US, their nutrient data from 1950 to 1999. By the way, we're in 2026, so a lot of this has even changed to the worse. But even from 1950 to 1999, 43 fruits and vegetables found significant decreases in protein, calcium, iron, vitamin C, and phosphorus and riboflavin. Now, if I was to take just protein and vitamin C and calcium, because that is generally what we're looking at, protein had come down by 6%, calcium had come down by 16%, and vitamin C had come down by 15%. Now, this may not look like something drastic, but if you have been eating a fruit and you're calling it a banana, and when you're thinking of your granddad, you're thinking he ate this banana particularly, you're wrong, right? So, as all of you know, if any of you have tried to get any amount of protein in with your diet, you understand that it's already hard to begin with. So, in these slight differences, may not make a difference in that one meal, but on the large scale of things, can make somewhat of a significant difference. Right, but now I get the argument that somewhat we can take protein powders. Well, our grandfathers didn't have protein powders. Powders, it seems. What? Powders. Yeah, our grandfathers didn't have it. And in fact, even though protein powders have become something of mass adoption, we now have good brands that make good protein powders without adulteration. We are still not a population that consumes it in mass. And especially if you're over the age of 40, most of the people I know of that age group are always concerned about things like protein powders because they assume it to not be natural. Right? And this is the point that I'm trying to make here today. Look, just because you call something a fruit or a vegetable does not mean that it is in the same state that our grandparents used to eat it. Now, having said that, as long as our body can digest it, we're good. So the fruits and vegetables that we're eating now, our bodies can digest it to the largest extent. But our bodies can also digest protein powder because we have been evolved to eat protein. In fact, a quick thing on evolution that I think all of you would be interested in is, see, human beings have been around for roughly 300,000 years, right? 3 lakh years. The first human being coming from Africa. And the second most important thing that happened after we existed was the invention of farming, which is roughly, for what I understand, 5 to 8,000 years ago, right? Because civilization is roughly around 11,000 years ago. And I'm guessing, if I'm not wrong, the first civilization that we know of, at least as of today, is the Mesopotamian civilization, right? And the funny part about it is that although farming has been around for 5 to 8,000 years, a lot of our people today, particularly men and women over the age of 40, are still suffering from issues like diabetes and fatty liver, mainly caused by the overconsumption of carbohydrates, trans fats, which by the way only came 200 years ago. So we're barely used to eating trans fats as a population. And of course, processed foods, which contains both the carbohydrates, trans fats, and it also contains other chemicals, sodium. A lot of things that, of course, sodium we're used to eating, but a lot of the other chemicals in processed foods are not necessarily something that we have yet evolved to eat. And when I say yet, I mean the fact that, look, evolution takes thousands of generations, if not hundreds. So just because your granddad ate a marigold biscuit with trans fat in it does not mean that you can also eat that and get away with it. Because your granddad, right, which brings me to the second point of this life, is that life back then was very different. In fact, I'm sure all of us would have heard both from our grandparents and our parents as to how they would save bus fare of, say, 20 paisa and walk 20 kilometers just to get to a point. Right? And this was a normal thing for them. This is something that they would discuss in groups as something that they would do every day. Besides all the other stuff that they would do that consisted as movement and activity. And they used to eat better quality vegetables with 6% higher protein. And that was, by the way, only from 1950 to 1999. I'm pretty sure that it might have come down a little bit more because of the genetic modification and because of our desires of taste. Since they were eating better and moving better, their lives were obviously better. Right now, can a 40 or 50-year-old catch up to their level of activity now, especially if they've worked a desk job for the last 20 to 30 years of their life? Absolutely not. Right? Because even if you were to try and walk and run the same amount of distance, unless you're somebody who's been doing it for the last 20 to 30 years, it's not something that would mount to significantly. Right? Just because you walk 10,000 steps a day, it's better than doing nothing. Let me be straight about that. But it is definitely not something that is enough. Walking is a fundamental human activity. It is not exercise. If your doctor is prescribing you or telling you to walk, they are basically saying don't sit idle. They don't mean that that is all you're supposed to do and your life is going to get way better because of it. It may by a little, but not really much. And if you've seen our previous lives on diabetes, I have spoken multiple times about how many of my clients have actually walked and sometimes ran themselves into diabetes. Right? Because if at all you've been stagnant for a very long time, it is safe to say that a lot of your muscle mass would have depleted. And why I say this is because even someone like me, who has trained for 16 years, if I don't train for a month, I will lose muscle mass, right? And it's visible on how much muscle mass that I lose. So it's safe to say that if you're not somebody who has worked or like trained consistently over the last 20 to 30 years, you would have already lost some muscle mass. And on top of that, if you're going to continuously keep walking, your muscle mass is going to deplete further, especially because out of the 1,339 people that I've coached in the last many years, I would say 95% of them have been protein deficient. Right? And I'm speaking, by the way, of the people who are non vegetarians. I'm speaking about the people who consume protein powders. I'm speaking about all these people have all been protein deficient. And if you're protein deficient and you're sedentary for many, many years, despite walking, you are going to lose muscle mass. Right now, added to the fact that fruit and vegetables are being genetically modified to particularly have more carbohydrate content, right? Because that's what we find favorable. For example, the flesh in the banana, the red color stuff in the watermelon, carrots becoming bigger and more red and sweeter, corn becoming thicker with more kernels that are sweeter and more dense in flavor. It is safe to say that over time, this is going to be something that our bodies are not going to respond well to. One, of course, is because of the genetic modification in itself, which, by the way, is a very small factor, but it is a factor. And number two, which is the largest factor, which is our lifestyles, have gotten so much worse and so much different from before. Right? And this is the point that I'm trying to make in today's life. Just because your grandparents did something and got away with it does not mean that you will. And if you have that argument in your mind, and if you think that, oh, my granddad used to walk every day after the age of 50, so I will do the same, do not discount the fact that before the age of 50, your granddad has spent his entire life doing so much physical activity that you possibly can't even imagine doing. And if you had to accumulate all of that physical activity and somehow manage to pull it off in, say, 5 to 10 years after the age of 40, you would actually end up very diabetic, if not severely diabetic. And in fact, you may even end up with fatty liver. And this is actually a lot of the case and a lot of the situations that I deal with on a day to day, right? Because we have come into a place where a lot of people prescribe walking. In fact, even I prescribe walking. I say you should walk, everyone should walk, but as an activity, not as training, not as exercise. That should be to improve your muscle mass, joint strength, bone mineral density, mobility, and most importantly, the mind to body connection. And this is the way that you want to look at training. If this is something that you're not actively doing, then the dream that most people have when it comes to their fitness, or the goal that most people have when it comes to their fitness, which is basically just living an independent life, right? Because most of us don't want to be athletes. We don't want to be bodybuilders. We don't want to be these triathlon freaks. Not that I think they're freaks, but we don't want to be that. So, if you don't want to be that, the only thing that you expect out of your health is that you stay independent for the rest of your life, right? You don't have to shit in a bag. Your kids don't have to see you shit in a bag and then take it away because you can't get up. That is the bare minimum that we all expect with our health. And when you're looking at that, yes, it is important to understand that what we consider natural, or what term we give to the word natural, which is, for example, fruits and vegetables are considered natural, has changed. Right? In fact, I would even go as far to say that good quality protein powders are as natural to the human body as fruits and vegetables. Right? And I say good quality because there is a lot of bad quality shit in the market. And in fact, there is a lot of bad quality processing that happens to good quality shit in the market, which makes it bad quality. So the good one is actually as natural to our body as vegetables and fruits. Now, do I tell everybody that I meet to take protein powder? Absolutely not. In fact, I don't take protein powder most of the time myself, right? And you will see that my brand Growing Young is not really associated with any kind of supplement brand, because I believe that taking whole foods in the right manner and the right amounts is the first most important thing. If you cannot do that, taking a bit of supplements to make sure that you're not malnourished is critical. Because at the end of the day, this is the hierarchy: whole foods, supplements, malnourishment. What you don't want to be is malnourished. If you can get it through whole foods, good for you. Good for you. But if you can't, take the right supplements, like don't go like an idiot and buy whatever supplements that you see. Take the right supplements, do your research, and then make sure that you're not malnourished. Right. But having said that, let me address the most important point of the day. Since fruits and vegetables are changing, since our lifestyle is changing, what can we expect from the future? Right. And and this is something that I've been asked multiple times, because when I speak about these topics, most people don't really understand where to go from there. Right. See, I'm not uh what do you call those? I'm not an oracle. I'm not a fortune teller. But what I can say for sure is that over time, because of the way fruits and vegetables are starting to get diluted, unless we all focus on reversing that trend, which seems quite difficult as of now, not impossible. There are a lot of companies doing a good job over here. But unless we reverse that trend, it looks like a lot of us are going to be taking supplements, certain supplements, for the rest of our lives, right? And a good example of this is vitamin D. right? A lot of us are vitamin D deficient. In fact, I'm pretty certain to say that if you've never taken a vitamin D supplement, you are either deficient or insufficient, right? So, like slightly above deficient, but not optimal. Most of us are like that. And a lot of people think that, yeah, you can get vitamin D from the sun. Then explain to me how a lot of India, especially rural India, which consists of farmers, are still vitamin D deficient. It doesn't make sense, right? And since there are not a lot of fruits or vegetables or foods in general with vitamin D, in fact, the only food that I know of that has even a decent amount of vitamin D, and when I say decent, I mean better than the rest, but still shit, is mushrooms, right? And I'm not sure if this estimate is right, but a bare minimum of 10 to 12 kilos of mushrooms need to go in a day for you to be able to get even a little bit of the right amount of vitamin D. And if you've been deficient for a while, forget about it, right? So now what has happened is vitamin D as a supplement has become natural to our body, right? And a lot of the times I get the argument saying that, hey, Samat, my granddad never took these pills. He was super healthy, right? And we go back to where we started. Now, let me put it this way. Even in our last life or the life before that, we covered that there is a difference between being able and being healthy. Right? There are a lot of people who can do a lot of crazy things in the world, a lot of physical abilities that you can't even imagine, at least for yourself. But a lot of them are not healthy. In fact, I would challenge those people that if they went under an epigenetic test, which is going to be now the gold standard of genetic testing, epigenetic testing, I can guarantee that most of these people who are in severe amounts of physical activity will actually have a biological age. That means their actual body's age will be older than where they are now. Right. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're 50 years old, you are a triathlon athlete, or triathlete. You're not like the best at recovery. You don't really spend 8 to 9 hours a day sleeping. You don't really have a stress free life. It's almost certain to say that when you go under an epigenetic test, you will see that your body's biological age will be higher than 50, and maybe like more than 50, whatever that number may be. And the reason for that is because becoming able just requires consistent practice and consistent training. Becoming healthy requires a certain amount of consistent practice, a certain type of consistent practice, focus on recovery, focus on managing stress, and a lot of other things that we don't consider about being able. And this is the mistake that most of us do when we compare ourselves with our grandparents. And this is the mistake that I hope today's life helps you avoid. Now, I understand that when I put out this message, I may cause more confusion than give clarity. Right? And if you're trying to understand what to do on a personal level for you to be able to actually solve these issues, then you can always, of course, book a consult with me. All you need to do is type the word growth in the comments. My team will reach out and set up a call between us just to make sure that you get that personal advice or attention that you're looking for. But if you're somebody who doesn't want to do that, right? You just want to be healthy. What can you do? Let me break this down into 4 pillars. And in fact, these 4 pillars are going to be the same for the rest of your life. One is the right kind of training, right? So, better cardiovascular health, better muscle mass, joint strength, bone mineral density, better mobility. If you're able to actually get these, good for you. Number two, making sure that you're not malnourished. Right? I'm not even talking about something crazy like quit all the food that you love eating and like eat some fucking boiled vegetables and chicken. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying don't be malnourished, right? And number three is, of course, sleep and recovery. Focus a lot on that. Now, if you are having insomnia issues or other specific issues, and this sounds like redundant advice to you, then of course, always reach out to me, or in fact, reach out even to your doctor to see what they can do. I am not a doctor, by the way. I would like to point this out in case I have not many times already. So, but these are the three things, right? And the fourth thing is have good community, right? Invest in people who you actually look forward to living life with. That may be your parents, that may be your partner, that may be your kids, that may be your friends, that may even be your driver, right? But, and in fact, actually, like when a lot of people have confessed, for some people, it's just their mistress. I'm not, I'm not going to go into that today. But whatever floats your boat, do that. And these are the four things that you're looking at really maintaining. And if you can do all of this in a balance, which is, by the way, as you would have known, very difficult, you are way more likely to be healthier than a lot of people who are triathletes or people who run 25-kilometer marathons every weekend. Because being healthy requires a balance of all these things. Being able requires just consistent focus and pushing forward. And that is what I'll leave you with today. I really hope that these lives that I'm doing are educational and help in order to remove certain myths or thoughts that may have come in your mind, but you have not been able to fully word into questions or you've not gotten correct answers for. Right? And if there are any topics that you would like me to cover in particular, I'd be happy to do that. You can either drop me a DM, put it in the comments, and we can take it from there. But all in all, thank you for joining today's live. My name is Samarth, and you are in the Growing Young Lives, which we will be hosting quite regularly. And I hope to see you in the next one. See you all soon.